Rebel Devs Podcast, a show that challenges conventional thinking in the tech industry. Each episode features conversations with solutionists who have taken unconventional approaches to problem solving, pushing the boundaries of what's possible in their respective fields. Join the devolution.
Howdy, folks, and welcome to the latest episode of the Rebel Devs. I'm Jonah May. I'm joined by my host, Tom, and we've got our Vanguard friend, Maurice, with us here today. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
I'm doing pretty well, too. What are we doing here, guys? I think we're chit-chatting about something, but maybe my coffee hasn't kicked in yet.
I think Maurice and I are specifically here today so we can talk a little bit about the second annual Veeam Community Hackathon that we're organizing.
That sounds pretty fun. I remember last year was a great kickoff to it all, and I'm sure all of our followers are a little bit interested in this because, honestly, they may not know much about it if they haven't been following things. I think you guys have talked to Veeam. Have you done a Veeam 100 show on this, if I remember correctly?
Not this year, but we've got a couple lined up here in the next few months. I think we've got the entire summer, actually, the next 3 months. We'll be meeting with 3 of the 4 teams that participated and interviewing them on the show.
Oh, wow. So we're like the early entry in, like you heard about it here first, and then you can jump in and check out all the Veeam channels. So, all right, guys, well, tell us, what's a hackathon? Because some of the listeners may not even know what a hackathon is, and take it away, guys.
Despite of what you might think of a hackathon is not trying to enter something in particular. You're trying to extend a product with some extras that you created instead of trying to break into a piece of software or an environment. So you're making an additional product on top of an existing product. For example, you could see a PowerShell module for Veeam backup replication, or like last year, the best practices for VB 365.
Yeah, like Maurice was saying, it's really not the traditional, you're hacking program. You need to be a programmer to participate. We prefer it more as hack something together in order to create something new. So it's not even just, like I said, programmers participating. It's people from various aspects of the product design process. You've got people from maybe sales or marketing helping you come up with business cases and design a presentation. You've got your project managers helping oversee the teams. Obviously, you have programmers helping implement as well, but it's really an event that's open to everyone. And we took a lot of feedback from last year with it being our first event, and we took it to heart, and we're hoping this year will be the new and improved 2.0 model. Chief among other things, it's a 72-hour event this year for the coding period rather than 24 hours end to end for the event, as well as giving teams some time to meet beforehand, get to know each other, maybe do some icebreakers and do some brainstorming before the official kickoff. And fingers crossed, we're still in some negotiations with some sponsors, but we're hoping to also give each team dedicated lab environments this year because we kind of had to cobble things together through some of the leaders last year who happened to have their own home labs.
So it will be better and bigger compared to last year.
That sounds really exciting. I think one of the cool things is as I look to the hackathon, we always say hackathon because I think somebody coined the word when we think about it. But in my mindset, it's not really a how can I penetrate Veeam? How can I do certain things? It's kind of like, can I find something that Veeam can do that I might not think about doing and bringing that to market? And this wasn't one of the ideas, but in my own realm, we ran into a lot of customers that were looking to do data center moves, and we were helping them with their continuity needs. And they were trying to figure out this whole convoluted third-party vendor. And we were really just talking internally, and we were like, well, very easily you have this product that backs up to other locations. Could we not use replication jobs? Could we not seed them with backups? And could we not consolidate? And suddenly we realized for ourselves, Veeam makes for a very good data center mover, a relocation, consolidation. And I think with the hackathon, that's a little bit of what we were kind of looking to do. When it came down to a team that I helped lead, we went through Veeam 1, which I was not really deep on Veeam 1. Use it, monitor with it, but kind of set it and forget it. And being that Veeam 1 was kind of the assigned product, I myself was a little hesitant. I was like, man, I don't know. Like, how can I compete in the sexiness of this product, right? Like, if you're thinking about flagship Veeam awesomeness, no one raises their hand and goes, Veeam 1, except for the Veeam 1 guys. And we love guys like Jorge and whatnot. But a couple things I took away from my team, coming together with a group of strangers and not having a lot of coders, we started trying to come up with ideas of what could we use Veeam 1 for. And really what we tried to do was come up with a custom portal of SLA metrics that we felt that Veeam 1 was lacking. And we wanted it accessible for, say, executives. So one of the developers used a product called Figma, which he was familiar with, and I had only just learned about. And what he was able to do was do screenshots to kind of show flows of how the screens would flow. But my takeaway from the end was 2 wins on my side. And then I'm going to ask you for your wins here. One of the developers I met who was a student working on their master's, I was able now to say, hey, I have some kind of programming work in my own organization that I would love for you to do, having worked with you. And he was able to gain experience for his resume pass there, which was really awesome. The second thing is I think that I'm much stronger in Veeam 1 because I was kind of in this time pressure sensitive thing to what can we do with Veeam 1. So that was really quite nice for me for a personal one. But if Maurice or Jonah or both, what do you see as some of the wins from the hackathon last year?
For me personally, I think I learned a lot about organizing a major event because, let's be honest, creating a hackathon for a group of people all over the world is a challenge because you have so many different time zones, so many different people, so many different skills, so many different interactions and way to interact with each other. For me, I think I learned a lot about how you could do and organize such an event, which was a challenge for me.
Yeah, for me, it was very cool to see the end results of what the teams came up with, especially given the limited time in which they had to create everything. Even to this day, we're still, almost a year later, we're still seeing some fruit bear from it. So, for example, there's Jonathan Colin. He's another fellow Vanguard. He maintains the Veeam as-built reports for VBR. And earlier this year, he created VB365 as-built reports. And he actually, about 2 weeks ago, posted into our thread where we posted the results of the competition on the Community Hub to say a lot of the verification of the best practices he added to his new as-built report actually came out of Team 4's best practices analyzer that they built, which in itself was based off of the best practices analyzer, now called the security and compliance analyzer that was added to Veeam Backup and Replication with version 12.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the good things is that the products created will live on, and in this case, it's still community driven compared to something that's incorporated into the software itself.
Hey, I like that. I'm glad that you guys hit upon that, was the community side to it. Internally as Vanguards, and Maurice, you're a legend also, we get a little bit more of a channel into the product development, but we don't really get to make those decisions ever. And so what has to happen is we have to kind of verbally or in a forum post say, hey, we see a shortfall in the product. Can we get this? And then it goes on to a product roadmap, which I joke goes to die because, Veeam is doing so many changes everywhere. But what's really great about this project is a team came together and they built it. And then somebody actually saw it and said, it will be a thing, if you will. And I know that the as-built report's not an official channel, but I know a lot of people in the community using it. I think the second thing that's awesome is as you look at some of the names that were participating, and maybe you guys could share some. I know I ended up on my Veeam 1 team. I got to work with Jorge de la Cruz in there from, who's the Veeam 1, basically, I think, product manager, if you will. While we're working here, we're actually working with the guy that brings this product to market, that manages it. That's a strong voice, but just getting to meet. What were some of the other teams like on the hackathon?
Some of the other teams, I think one had Michael Cade, who is one of the people who is responsible for Kasten by Veeam.
Yeah, I think he's actually a field CTO now as well recently. He got a promotion earlier this year. And then team 4 had Corinne Bissett and Julia First-Margato from the product strategy team, Rick Vanover's team. So if you've been to a VeeamON or even a recent conference, you've most likely seen Corinne and or Julia present. And I think one of the cool things was, besides just having the college students like we talked about, a lot of them I think came through some of Julia's channels because she does a lot of podcasting herself. I'll give that a shout out. Maybe we can throw a link to her podcast over in our notes when this goes live. But I think specifically Corinne might have been the one to come up with the best practices analyzer, or at least originally pitch it to her team as team leader, because I think it was something she had been wanting to see in VB365, given that she works a lot with the product and does a lot of demos for it. So it was kind of an opportunity for her with the team to go and implement something she wanted in the product that maybe wasn't necessarily getting development cycles due to other priorities at the time.
I also think that it's a good way to interact with the product strategy team and maybe R&D teams inside Veeam as a outsider compared to the Veeam Vanguards or the Veeam Legends, because currently it's mostly only available for the Vanguards and Legends to directly interact with them. And this way, they have the possibility to talk to those people.
Yeah, and that was one of several reasons that we originally founded the hackathon, to let the community get a taste of some of the experiences we get as part of the Veeam 100. And equally so, all three of us here are user group leaders, both for local regions and two of us for the automation desk, hence us coming up with the hackathon. But I know there's been a big struggle amongst the user groups in the wake of the pandemic to kind of get reorganized and get going again. So some of the hope was this could drive some community engagement and help maybe jumpstart some of the other user groups. This year, it sounds like as part of our expansion, we're even in talks with some of our sponsors and partner companies, as well as some user group leaders, to try and organize, rather than global teams, some specialized teams. Like I know specifically Jeff Burke this year, rather than being a regular team leader and maybe focusing on Kasten like last year, has talked to us about doing an object first team. So bringing in some of his coworkers from his new company. And I know some of the user group leaders have expressed interest in, hey, maybe we can find somewhere to meet up for a couple days in person and do an in-person team that competes.
It's interesting because last year, I personally felt like my team was at a disadvantage. When I looked at the talent on the other teams from Veeam, I was almost taken aback. Like, how did I get the people on my team and yet there really wasn't a lot of people? Like when I looked at Michael Cade's team, I was like, well, there goes the whole Kubernetes group. Like, this is what they know. This is what they're going to do. This is what they're going to own it. But in the aftermath, seeing it, if more teams were organized by that, I think you almost have like just hired specialists in there coming together. So if Jeff's going to put together an object first team, and I don't know what they're going to do, immutability or something, or fill in the blank, because they're all their specialties, I think killer products ideas are going to come forward for it, which is absolutely awesome in those regards. And it's nice to see that excitement, because even in the user group, and Jonah hit the nail on the head, is, hey, I'd love to go to the Texas user groups and say, hey, let's organize a team. They're still in such an upstart because of the recovery from COVID, at least in the United States, that I don't even know that there's community yet. We're starting to build that. So if we bring people in, it would be nice to bring them into other teams that exist that they can get to know. And community standpoint, I mean, I've always been impressed with Veeam, that as we look at those forums, that as we post, and it's comical to me, you'll see people get in arguments with other people on there. And then you're like, that's the person in charge of whatever, or that's Anton. He literally is the godfather of all things. And you're basically telling him he's wrong about VBR. What other company really has the actual talent in those forums? This brings us to meeting to the next level. It's one thing to type in a forum and go back and forth. At least on my team, we had regular touch point meetings, video conference, speaking to one another outside of email and Discord. Yes, we were chatting, but we actually got to know one another as we went through it. And so as you see some of those names and some of the names you guys have in this event, I mean, those are like keynote speakers. Those are presenters at VeeamON. I mean, these are very top tier folks. It's not just someone in a support queue, not to knock them. Like, these are the go-to names at Veeam. And to be able to meet them, and then in the community, having other legends and vanguards in there, brings about community. So I really do greatly appreciate that mix of everything. And I think that's going to be special about this year, is seeing the pivot into it. And I think things only get better the more you do it. It's kind of like Jeff Bezos. You learn how to fail and fail fast so you know what to do. And I know that's not the exact quote, but the quicker we get through things and we just kind of ebb and shift. You guys definitely didn't fail, but I mean, being behind the scenes, I watched both of you taking avid notes saying, all right, we see this is going on. How can we make this better? How can we make this better? How can we make this better? And I think that's what's so nice about this, is it's just dynamic. And I'll throw a little dig at Veeam. I guess we don't have the corporate overlords, if you will, kind of governing everything. It really is community driven, which is awesome, because that gives you a whole bunch of agility in doing this all. I mean, Maurice, what would you think about that? Pretty accurate statement, or am I way off the mark here?
No, I think you're correct there. And I think creating a team and being able to talk to each other and build the product that you think can add on existing products is a great power that's been put into your hands, because you have this amazing product called Veeam, and you add something on top of that that makes it even more amazing, in my opinion. At least that's the goal for me as an organizer.
Jonah, would you add anything into that?
I agree a lot with what you were talking about. We went into it and, Maurice and I only had limited bandwidth, and we were working to secure some other potential organizers for future years, but it just wasn't materializing for the first year. So, we kind of went in with the mentalities of fail early, fail often, but always fail forward. And we don't know what we don't know. So to your point, we had, I think, like a 4,000 word document by the end with over 50 potential ideas and suggestions of both just things that we both observed as we were planning the event, or we wanted to do but didn't have the time to implement the first year, and feedback we received from participants and especially a lot of the team leaders.
It's interesting to me because in the past, when I've looked at hackathons and looked at other profiles and companies, it always seems to be an internal thing from what I can see. It's internal employees get together for a gamification, team building, and companies are realizing on the R&D side, this is a great way to bring about innovation. Instead of a developer sitting there being told, you will code, you will build this trinket. Instead, it's like, programmer, what could you do? And maybe they're an AI guy and they decided, oh, we could hook some AI in over here. And it's interesting with the community side because you're getting the cross mix of internal employees and the community side. And while Veeam thinks everything Veeam and has a certain culture about it, when we bring the community in, we're just those outsider eyes. In my experience with projects, sometimes I have been trying to solve the most difficult problem, if you will, just something I can't get over, can't figure it out. And then casually I might be talking to a friend, a colleague outside of my organization. I'm like, oh, I'm trying to do this. And yeah, it's really been frustrated. And they're just like, oh, did you do this? And you're just like, oh my gosh, that was so blatantly obvious and easy. And it was just those fresh eyes. And I think that's what's nice about the culture that you two are building in the hackathon is people outside of the organization. I worked with a gentleman one time that used to always say, feedback is a gift. And we hear it in scouting. This guy was a T-Mobile person. And he was like, they had to teach their support organization that every single comment and concern that came forward from a customer is a gift. And often we get so defensive about it and we're like, no, it's supposed to go this way. I'll dig at Microsoft a little bit. It's not a bug, it's a feature. When I worked at Apple, it was like, we won't install Flash because it's terrible. And so grandma can't watch cat videos because HTML5 was the way to go. And you know what? Steve Jobs was right all day long. However, at the end of the day, we were losing sales because grandma couldn't watch cat videos. It was so frustrating. What's awesome about the community is the ability for those outside of the official Veeam channel to come in and have a voice and work together and get to know folks. Because as you meet these internal Veemers, they are the most pleasant and personable people. They value the community. They really, really do. This is not, to my understanding, the community of Veeam. It's not marketing driven, right? It's not these channels exist and marketing is going to control what's going on. It's very much kind of like rebel rousers coming up from the bottom and just bubbling up into this community. And that's what makes it so much fun over there. Maurice, you're a legend. We've talked about what Vanguards are kind of in the past, but could you just share a little bit about being a Veeam legend with us, especially since you work on the automation desk? Maybe we should cover legend and automation desk together, because some folks may not even understand the automation desk either.
Well, legend, I think it's really close to being a Vanguard as well. However, compared to the Vanguards, it's the thing that you do on their community. It's not specifically being on your own platform like your WordPress or your GitHub or whatnot, what you have done. For a legend, the things that you do are either on the R&D forums or on the community hub. So what I created on the automation desk, because I started the automation desk as well, I created a platform or a group inside the existing platform where you could go to with your questions and your ideas or the things that you had done in the automation area, allowing you to create your own platform or your own way of explaining what you have done and do your thing.
You know, you in the last year have brought me in as an automation desk leader to help run the show a little bit. But even just as a participant, it was cool to see some of the stuff people came up with and were posting or asking about. And equally so, you know, especially now as the leader, I am definitely not an expert on everything. So even just outside the hackathon, that community hub is a good opportunity for some of the regular community members who aren't a Vanguard or a legend to interact with product strategy. Because I know there have definitely been times where someone posted, you know, a question about, oh, how can I script something in some Veeam product? And maybe I'm not familiar with the product, but, you know, I know the person on product strategy or the product management team who handles a lot of that stuff. So I maybe punt over to them and tag them, and they'll usually chime in and provide some recommendations and help people out.
True, Vito, I'm not an expert on automation as well. I know my way around the sources that you need to create the automation that you need. So, like I've said before, you have to start with your goal. What is the thing that you want to achieve? You start with writing down in your own native language, either it's English or whatever language you are speaking, what is my goal that I want to achieve? I want to set my verification on my backup job on every Friday of the week. That's my goal. Okay, then you go into documentation. You figure out what you need to do to achieve that goal. Find the steps, try it on your test environment, never on your production environment. There's no testing on production, right? No testing. And you test on your test environment the steps that you want to take. And because you have 50 jobs that you need to change. So instead of click in your UI, you find a way to automate that. Because if you have to do things twice, please automate it. It saves you so much time.
Yeah, going back to that whole time, what you were saying, and, you know, times I had to punt to someone from product strategy. A cool one I saw in the hub a few months ago was there was someone writing an Ansible script for employee offboarding anytime someone resigned or was terminated. And as part of that process, they wanted to have the Ansible script talk to their VB365 server and create a backup job and run a backup of that user account before it was deleted from M365.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Automate. I have always been a major supporter of automation, from the days of login scripts to even just redoing the simplest things of what I do. And to Maurice's point, I have myself written code that could be 400, 500 lines of code, because really it could be 3 lines of code that I was able to cobble together and then just basically copy paste instead of doing like loops and different things. And as I got better, refining what I did, what's a better way to write this code and whatnot. It's interesting because not using ChatGPT to necessarily design my code, I have been able to take snippets, pop it in and say something like, is there a better way to do X, Y, Z? And I've been able to find some logic. Now, I'll tell you, the logic a lot of times is incorrect, but now I know what I'm looking for to be able to go, oh, look, how do I write a catch or something like that? And then I can go through. And then it's just kind of, I guess I'll call myself the dirty programmer in that sense versus somebody that is very formalized in what they do.
I remember from back in the day when I started doing little bits and pieces of automation, and I indeed it started with login scripts. I think I ended up at one point with a piece of software called Kickstarter, which allowed you to create a more complex script inside your login script to actually do stuff for that user, like install a printer, or in my case, I think I copied over a procman.ini file so that the user had a different profile compared to a admin and had more permissions inside Windows 3.11, which is way old. I'm showing my age here a bit. That was giving a lot of possibilities and capabilities within your way to automate your login as well. So yeah, automation goes way back.
Wow, it's amazing. Kickstarter.
Automation can be really small. It can be as simple as creating a login script to mount a Z drive to a user's home folder, or like I said, install a printer for a user automatically when they log in. But it can also be really big, like completely creating your backup jobs for you.
Or even bigger than that. I mean, back to the spirit of the hackathon, and, shameless plug for myself real quick, because it's a series I'm going back and hopefully finishing on posting on the hub this year. Something I've worked on at various companies and in the spirit of the hackathon is, Veeam recently started building a REST API interface for Veeam backup and replication. As I'm sure the people on this podcast know, it's still very limited. The PowerShell commands do quite a bit more, but something I figured out how to do using .NET is build my own REST API wrapper that, where possible, acts as an intermediary. If a VBR REST API already exists, it hits the existing REST API. And if it doesn't, it uses PowerShell and runs embedded PowerShell core over to Windows PowerShell, since, at least as of right now, the VBR is still Windows-based. We're going to see that change with version 13. It'll be interesting to see how PowerShell commands work after that. Because essentially, I found in a lot of cases, there was a use case where it was very complicated to remotely run PowerShell commands on a Veeam server, using WinRM or remote PowerShell connections, especially keeping in mind Veeam best practices of, keeping your Veeam system off domain. And in a lot of cases, remote PowerShell really doesn't work all that well if it's off domain, if at all. And so the idea was, hey, we can be on a separate domain. We can hit our own REST API endpoints. And at least until Veeam has a fully developed REST API for VBR, we can do these things and easily remotely access for whatever automations we want to do. In this case, working at a service provider, it was going through the process of mounting customer backups from Windows repositories and recovering them into a vCenter environment for disaster recovery. But I mean, the possibilities for it were endless, especially as we look at things that Veeam has fleshed out with 11 and 12, like their data integration API, their incidents API, their inline malware scanning. All of that can be manipulated through PowerShell or REST API. And therefore, you can write all sorts of automations, either through something like Ansible or Kickstarter, or you can, like I did, make that REST API wrapper and access it from anywhere if you don't want to run those specific automation endpoints on the Veeam server.
I think for V13, I think Veeam will keep the PowerShell functionality in there because PowerShell is not bound to Windows. You can run PowerShell on Linux and on macOS as well. Truth be told, there are things that don't run on Linux and or macOS because the libraries, and there's no integration for that in the operating system. But there are still possibilities to run PowerShell on non-Windows operating systems. I think for V13, in my perspective, I think Veeam will continue supporting the PowerShell and giving you the possibility to interact with the non-Windows VB360 VBR server in this case.
Yeah, I bet they will, just because they don't want to, exit from one version to the next without telling people and break all sorts of automations. But what's going to be interesting with it is, even as Veeam has started to build the core of VBR to potentially be ready to be cross-platform in preparation for 13, where we've seen them lay that framework, that PowerShell module has continued to be kind of a thorn in everyone's existence for cross-platform because, for the longest time, it was a PowerShell snap-in, which was deprecated back in like PowerShell version 2. With version 11, I think they finally transitioned over to a proper PowerShell module. But inside of their commandlets, they have all sorts of like CTOR and mutex manipulations and a lot of calls that are Windows PowerShell exclusive, which means it doesn't work cross-platform with like PowerShell core. And, this will be covered as I get back and expand that series on the REST API wrapper. But one of the challenges I found running a REST API wrapper was I used ASP.NET, which launches embedded PowerShell core. Well, PowerShell core is not compatible, at least today, with Veeam's PowerShell module. So I had to do all sorts of manipulation on the Windows server to pass my C# into embedded PowerShell core, from PowerShell core to the built-in PowerShell on the Windows system, and then pass it all back while also maintaining like custom object layouts and whatnot, because I don't remember what the final fix was, but specifically I remember it kept trying to return an array of strings instead of an array of objects or a singular object with all the passing back and forth.
Do you think we're going to keep driving down PowerShell plus REST API, or do you think we might actually see some bash commands come forward? I know that Veeam really pushes for API to do away with PowerShell. So I'm almost leaning towards, if we're on Linux, we're not going to have the APIs, but I'm wondering if we're going to start bashing some things in there. What are your thoughts about that?
I think Bash will be 14.
Maybe.
I don't think it will be in 13. I think it will be available in 14 or maybe 13.1, but I don't think it will be there out of the box.
I think Veeam long-term, yes, will give us the option because Veeam has always been good about the freedom of choice. However, I think really before we see a transition over to Bash, I think we're going to see some major investment. First of all, they're going to have to invest quite a bit to update the PowerShell module for 13, so it runs on Linux and PowerShell core. But I think we're going to see a major expansion of the REST APIs like a lot of us have been wanting for a number of years, because if you look across Veeam's product suite to their other offerings, VB365, of course, has a PowerShell module, but a lot of the focus is shifted over to the REST API. But the other products that have only been out for a few years, like the public cloud appliances and Veeam Backup for Salesforce even, while not all of them officially have REST API documentation, my understanding is all of those with the web consoles are based off an API first approach, where everything you're doing in a web console, whether it's a documented API or not, is calling a REST API behind the scenes as you click buttons or load data.
I think that could be a really nice product for a hackathon team to create a wrapper around the complete REST API that Veeam has to offer as of today. I think that could be a great idea for one of the teams.
I think it's a good start, and like you said, a great idea. Personally, I made it more out of necessity when I did it back in the day. The challenge I had with it is I have a bit of a preference to the REST API, not just because of some of the ease of access that I've already talked about, but I also found when version 11 dropped, specifically running something like a get command, like list all backup repositories, for example, I found for whatever reason with Server 2022's built-in PowerShell, if I ran a Veeam command, the first command would take often like 30 seconds to run and collect that data. Subsequent calls of the same command were faster, but if I ran a REST API, every time consistently, it only took like maybe 1 or 2 seconds at most to return that data. So I found I never really got the chance to test, because of the limited release with 11 back when I was doing this, how something like a post or a patch command would work to actually send data over to execute a command or update something. But I at least found with reading data, the REST API was a significantly faster response time than the PowerShell.
I think if you create a wrapper around the REST API with PowerShell, and maybe even with a bash or a shell script, I think if you can create that as a team, I think you have a really powerful product.
I agree.
All right, we're coming to the end of our time together. What I'd like to do is bring it back to the hackathon. We've touched hackathon. We've talked V13, which is pretty awesome. I think there's some more conversations that can be had around that. But as we bring back to the hackathon, what do we need to know? What are some key dates? What's it look like?
Well, the hackathon runs in September from the 26th till the 29th, and we start at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. and it runs for 72 hours. So it ends at 9 a.m. on the Sunday. And if you want to know more or sign up, please go to veeamhackathon.com.
And signups are currently open and close, I believe, the first Friday in September.
Correct.
For those of you tuning in for the first time, Tom works over at Different Dev. So any professional services you need, go to differentdev.com. I'm a member of CyberFortress, a Veeam cloud service provider, so we can protect your data offsite and help recover you. You can find us at cyberfortress.com. And Maurice, real quick, who do you work for and what do you guys do?
I work for info.nl, which is an internet agency for short. So reach out to us if you want anything from a digital agency.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. I always love having these conversations with you. We've always got something to talk about. And for our viewers, we'll talk to you guys next time on the next episode.
Whether you're a seasoned solutionist or just starting out, the Rebel Devs podcast is a must listen. So join us. Comment, share, and subscribe. Be part of the Rebel Devs.